Welcome to another episode of Branding Like a Boss, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the cannabis industry's most influential brands and the talented minds behind them. I'm your host, Angela Pih, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Javier Hasse, Managing Director at Benzinga. Javier is one of the most trusted voices and pioneers reporting on cannabis. He's an author, an award-winning reporter. His work has appeared in major outlets like CNN, Rolling Stone, CNBC, Yahoo Finance, and Entrepreneur Magazine. Over the course of our conversation, we're going to dive into this ever-changing cannabis industry that we're all living in and key trends, positive or negative, that Javier is seeing. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a marketing professional, or simply fascinated about the cannabis industry, you're in for a real treat. So let's dive right in. Javier, so excited to have you. You're just a feature of our industry, and I know everybody knows you, but just in case, for those who might not be familiar, can you give us a brief background of how you got into cannabis and why you're still here?
Those are good questions, actually. And thank you for having me. And all shucks on all the intro. Big fan of beer, bro. So delighted to be here. It is a treat for me as well. I didn't get to celebrate Halloween yesterday because we were at the full moon sesh down here in Argentina. So I kind of got to celebrate, but there was no candy, more so like dabs and joints. It's all good. It's adult stuff. Got into cannabis, 20 years ago, I got into cannabis per se. Love the plant.
So you're 41 years old now?
What?
So you're 41 years old now?
Let's say so. I'm not, but, I'm not going to lie here. I don't recommend it. People should wait for their brains to be developed. But, my story is my story.
I love it.
Just so happens. Started growing about 16 years ago. And in 2013, I was writing about finance for U.S. media outlets. And my editor said, hey, we want someone to write about marijuana stocks. And none of the serious, well-respected journalists that we have want to sign this article. And we do need someone to actually, sign the byline if they're going to write it. We can't just be talking about stocks and saying, unknown author. And so I did, and it was one article and never looked back. Instantly started getting emails from people saying, hey, there aren't a lot of people writing seriously about cannabis without all the puns, understanding the industry, understanding the potential of these companies. There were a few publicly traded companies at the time, and that turned into a career. 2014, I joined Benzinga, and we started our cannabis vertical, which has since thrived and grown a lot. Nowadays, it's the most read cannabis news source in the world. And I think that's about it, right? And started writing for all the publications who didn't want me before, and I had applied to write for them, and they were all saying no. And suddenly I was getting calls from Playboy and Forbes saying, hey, we want your cannabis content. Wrote a book for Entrepreneur Media in 2017, 2018 about cannabis business. I think it's somewhere back there. That went on to be a bestseller on Amazon. That was very cool. And then started, public speaking, started my own company with Nati back here, El Planteo. It's the most read cannabis news source in the Spanish speaking world now. And got another book coming out on November 5th with my great friend, Nicolas Jose Rodriguez, also from Argentina, representing to the rest of the world.
Amazing. Well, let's start there, because when your first book, Starting Your Own Cannabis Business, was launched and made available in the beginning of 2020, there were only 8 adult use states, and now there are 24, and now 40 medical marijuana legal states. What's changed? What have you seen? I mean, that was only a little bit more than 4 years ago. From
the book was, I think, 2018, but still, there's a lot that has changed.
Yeah, because I read and listened through a lot of that book over the course of the last couple of weeks, because I knew I was meeting with you and that you were going to be coming on the podcast. And I was like, oh, I better do some research.
That's hilarious. Did you do the audiobook? I recently listened to it and I was like, this is crazy, dude.
Uh-huh.
I was listening to someone else read my own words, and it was insane. I hadn't heard it before.
Uh-huh.
Like 5 years after it came out, I was like, hey, I got to check this out.
Yes, I tend to consume books through audio, and yes, having this person's voice, which sounds nothing like yours, um, talking to me, but hearing your voice in my head was really cool.
Very trippy. I kind of loved it. Uh, what has changed is a lot, right? And I think it's what you were going to say before I interrupted you, and I'm so sorry, but I get excited. Um, I think that what you were going to say is how many more states came online, and I think that is a good reminder for those of us in the cannabis community, in the movement for legalization, and
Yeah.
in the industry, especially in the industry, where we complain about so many things and often talk about how slow the government is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure I agree. Um, we've seen what 70 countries legalize cannabis in some way, shape, or form in the last 6 or 7 years. We've seen many U.S. states go medical, many U.S. states go adult use in only a few years. If any other policy progressed as fast, we'd have same-sex marriage and abortion rights in half of the world,
Yes.
right? And I'm not saying like these fights are interchangeable at all, right? But as in, the things that society sees as controversial, but at the
Sure.
same time there's a big push from society to get those laws passed. So while it is important that we keep fighting for legalization, for normalization, especially in the US where there's no federal framework, and I'm
Nope.
blown away by the fact that you don't have a medical law, at least. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
get adult use a little bit hard of it. Like, national medical law is like a no brainer. Everyone has it.
Yeah, sure.
And like, even extremely conservative countries have some kind of medical cannabis framework federally. Um, so it's important that we keep fighting, but it's also important to acknowledge that we've made a lot of progress, that we make a lot of progress every day, every year, every month, and that we're always faced with this dilemma, this dichotomy of, do we want laws passed quickly
Mm-hmm.
and urgently address very urgent patient needs that sometimes are life or death situations?
Absolutely.
It's my position. Or do we want a perfect law? If the law comes out quickly and it's not perfect and you're going to complain, the only other option was maybe wait 5 years till they get the law perfectly right. But in the process, a lot of people will suffer.
A lot of people will suffer, and
So
it's true.
I'm a believer in building upon an imperfect law, because that imperfect law still addresses the urgent needs of patient care. Uruguay did it that way. First country to legalize adult use cannabis, and the first law was like, we just don't want people in prison for this.
Yes.
Let's let's put out a framework for that. You can go to a pharmacy or you can go to a club, and then they started realizing that it was a much deeper complexity to regulating and legislating cannabis. That did imply the need, or that did mean that you had to regulate the industry, that you had to think of the industrial part of it, and the pharmaceutical part of it, and the medical aspect, and exports and imports. But suddenly, like overnight, they were like, hey, we got no more people going to prison for cannabis, and that was fantastic. And people who wanted to access cannabis could access it. Argentina, very similar case in a sense. We have a federal medical law. And the first thing they regulated was patient access, meaning home growing or a
Yeah.
caregiver model. Before issuing licenses, commercial grows, we still don't have commercial grows that can sell. And it's been, what, like 6 or 7 years since the law came out?
Yes.
The people have access. I can grow 9 plants at my house. So if I need medical cannabis, I can access it like within 3 months instead of waiting for years for the law to be perfect, for licenses to be issued, for people to do their several crops until they stabilize genetics, until they register this and that.
So do you anticipate that within context of that, right? Because if we're looking at several things, like we're seeing social change, we're seeing economic growth, we're seeing political change all happening at the same time. I mean, the political change of, not necessarily getting into it, are you for or against rescheduling versus descheduling on the political side, on the social side, in terms of the incarceration of nonviolent crimes and the people thousands and thousands of people who are in prison. And in terms of the social change from a broad standpoint, in terms of the American mindset, are we cannabis friendly or are we cannabis tolerant? Because 70% of public sentiment is favorable to cannabis.
I think the political class is cannabis tolerant, whether it's ideological or a political calculation of what's best for their interests. I think the American populace, on the other hand, is very cannabis friendly.
Yep.
Even more so than most other countries in the world. Polls show that. Cannabis consumption has been very normalized, even without a federal framework. Everyone knows about dispensaries. Everyone knows about CBD. If you ask around the rest of the world what CBD is, people don't really know. But you know all about it in America. I think there is a little bit of a disconnect there. Whether you're pro rescheduling, descheduling, yeah, as you said, it's a deeper conversation. I'm pro any progress.
Yes.
Anything we can get and build on that. Uh, every little step helps us push further. And sometimes change has to be gradual for politicians to be able to digest it, and even for society to be able to digest it. Because we do see as well that sometimes when they roll out like full-blown adult use programs, there is some backlash, and the population is not necessarily comfortable with public consumption or whatever it's like, or the red light district in Amsterdam or that kind of stuff. I have no problem personally, but I do understand that some people might not want people smoking around their kids or even smelling, other people smoking.
Yeah.
And it's a fair position.
Yeah, because I'm the same, super pragmatic. I want progress over perfection, because progress shows me that I can take little steps towards something. We're building towards something. We're working the wrinkles out versus I want the perfect thing right now. And when you reframed it in the beginning, you're right. I think that sense of restlessness of wanting all of it the best way possible right now, but not yet really recognizing the acceleration that it's been going through. That, I've been in the industry only since 2019, and just the amount of changes that's been happening over the course of those years have been incredible.
It's amazing. How many years did it take your kid to learn how to speak perfectly?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was she saying full sentences by age 3?
Mm-hmm.
Was her grammar excellent? Or did it take like a bunch of years to go through?
Sure. Just building up your vocabulary, right? And developing social skills to be able to use that vocabulary as a child. And then now thinking about where we are with cannabis and its infancy, and you're right. Just there's been a huge acceleration of change. You can't ignore the numbers. I think the last set of numbers I saw is that cannabis as an industry, regulated cannabis, contributes, I think it measures around 33 billion, but it contributes up to 113 billion worth of overall impact to the economy. And those are huge numbers that you can't ignore from a political and a social standpoint.
It's interesting, when you talk about infancy, it's I was thinking, maybe the cannabis industry is it's adolescence, and I don't know what the etymology is in English, but in Spanish, adolescence comes from like adolesce. You're missing something. You're not complete. You are somewhat developed, but you're still in development. You're still a few years away from reaching maturity. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of, I like that word. I'm thinking about words. It's like, it's in its adolescence. We're still missing things, not just maturity, but also we're missing things. We're missing better
Brain
law. We're
development,
missing.
function, social development, a lot of those, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's also one aspect when I'm asked when do we expect federal legalization to happen, and I'm actually a fan for let's not push it so quickly because we want to be self-regulating, self-policing before large industries come in to try and create it in the form that works well for them, right?
It's a dilemma. It's another big dilemma. It's like, hey, if the outcome of outright legalization, adult use, is for massive industries to take over, do we want that or not? Do we prioritize access, people not going to prison, people being released from prison, which I think, doesn't necessarily come hand in hand with legalization, but it should
Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
will as part of our movement's push. Um, but it's a good question, right? Is availability better? Or do we prioritize authenticity or the quality of business opportunities? Right, from a patient and a consumer standpoint, the best outcome is going to any drugstore, any bodega, and any pharmacy and being able to get different forms of cannabis depending on your needs.
Right.
Of course, that would go in detriment of dispensary owners. That would go in the detriment of craft growers.
Yes.
Um, there are so many things in play. Also, that's why I say, like, in the end, regulating and legislating is so complex, because when you prioritize one group's needs, you will very likely be neglecting other groups' needs. Um, to me, the most important thing is availability. People being able
Access.
to access
Access
cannabis.
and safe
I,
access.
yeah, I don't really care who is making money off of it, but, and it's a big but, it's also many of these people, and the business side, who for many years fought for the legalization and are largely responsible for the movement progressing.
Yes.
I don't have any answers. It's like whenever people
No,
ask, I have no answers for anything.
well, it's your perspective and how you seeing that development that's so valuable for this conversation. And you must get pitched and inundated every single day with different topics, like whether it's about business or about investing and finance. And since I come from the brand side of things and marketing side of things, you know, in terms of the inundation and the volume that you see, how do you choose what you want to write about from your standpoint?
So it's a good question. I don't know. I I respond to every email, or
Yeah.
most, even if it's a no. I do have like some preset answers, of course, but acknowledging I received it. Um, how I choose what to cover, usually for me, it's what I'm interested in. It's like who I
Uh-huh.
want to talk to. It's like, of course, if it's an interview and that kind of stuff. If it's an important political development or business development, it's a no-brainer. From the brand side, from where you're coming from, it's really if it catches my eye. If the company's cool, if the people behind the company are cool, and they deserve, or I think they deserve, our support. If it's something new to the consumer in some way, we try to cover at Benzinga. We try to cover as much as possible, right? Because many times developments that might seem unimportant to most could be important to some, whether it's the people in this market who didn't have access to this kind of gummy, or the investor in this publicly traded company who is thinking, okay, now they have this new form factor, so their sales can increase by X% or whatever. But ultimately, I think it comes down to if I think almost as a, almost as a consumer, that the product is cool or interesting.
So you're looking from the standpoint of from many dimensions then, right? Is it going to be interesting for the consumer? Will your readership consider it a valuable piece of content? And, who you're informing as well in terms of the business as well as the consumer. I know when I had my first article that was written by you, I was so excited. It was like, I made it, Javier's written about me somewhere. I was just like, oh my God. But it's true because in a way, from a PR standpoint, there's so many different outlets and so many different platforms. Getting an article written about something, it's not as huge lift as it used to be, but it's then who features you and who talks about it, and are they able to tell a story that's not just what's in your press release? It's actually tell a story that has more teeth.
It really depends, right? There's certain things that are very straightforward. I mean, if it's a product, it's like the product details, and then if I tried it, did I like it or not, right? There, there isn't always so much more to it. Sometimes there is.
Right? Oh, now you popping the balloon for me.
What?
Now you're like, you just popped that bubble. I thought, oh, there's going to be so much special about it.
I mean, it really depends. It really depends. Right? I think like some stories have a lot more to it. To them, and some it's like, hey, here's just a cool product, right? When we're talking about brands and products, sometimes it's like, hey, this dab company came out with the latest device. It's just cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a groundbreaking product, some kind of sublingual solution, oral solution,
or,
this or that.
Safety or testing or something that really catches your eye. Are there any brands that kind of stand out that comes top of mind that you think are really catching the consumer mindset and tapping into creating products that are truly valuable?
A lot of them. I also think a lot of it is driven by hype, marketing investments, PR investment, like all that pays off, right? When you're talking about mind share.
Yeah.
Companies don't always understand the value of mind share if they can't see a direct return on based on clicks or whatever, right? But being top of mind helps. And there are many brands, but like I'm gonna tell you, like for instance, last night I was at Full Moon Sesh in Argentina, and there was an event held by Puffco earlier that day, and suddenly like Puffco is omnipresent here.
Yes.
Because they made very good marketing efforts, I think. And a lot of people could argue, hey, there's this other brand is better. I like Focus V more. I like Dr. Dabber more. I like Stores and Bickle. Well, but they don't do dabs. It's like, well, but I like dry flowers. So, but they're top of mind when you're not in a market where you're going to a dispensary like I am. I don't have dispensaries, so like top of mind is really the brands that are loudest and are present in more events, more activations on social media. By the time I get to a dispensary, I'm really not thinking that much about the brands, right? I will go to the bud tender and say, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is the effect, the amount of THC. Give me what you got. I do enjoy some products more than others, right? Like the other day, I got like a bunch of samples from different brands, and one of them was like, hey, here we got like Kiva Camino.
Mm-hmm.
Those are delicious. And
yes.
I don't really love edibles, but they're delicious. And I was like, yeah, I'll have these. But I think many brands have done a great job, right? In terms of global mind share, I would probably say that raw rolling papers is one of the most predominant in many markets. OCV is very popular as well.
Yeah.
Cookies.
They're able to market in ways that a cannabis infused product can't.
Oh yeah, and they are available. They've been available forever. right?
Exactly.
You don't need a regulated market. You don't even need a legal market to be able to sell papers.
Yeah.
Um, Cookies was a different phenomenon because it the word got out about like the coolness of the brand, but most people have not tried the products.
The merch and all that too. Yeah.
Same thing, they don't have access. So but they definitely built up hype around the brand name. High Times is a global brand as well. To me, it's but in terms of recognition, yeah, I think that's my take. It's I don't necessarily have favorite brands, or I do, but it doesn't matter. But I do think that it matters who did a great job at branding like a boss.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, you just took us into the dispensary for a brief moment when you're saying, when you go to a dispensary, you're not necessarily thinking about certain brands. You're going straight up to the counter to speak to the bud tender. You've got certain parameters for what you want in terms of chosen products. So you're obviously super informed by the time you walk up to a bud tender. I've read stats that a average store is 500 plus SKUs.
Insane.
Right, 500 plus SKUs, and some of the bigger stores are 800 to 120 SKUs, right? And I think with basket sizes, what they found, I think it was through a recent study from Trees, that the stores that actually have the higher unit and higher value are the stores that have about 300 SKUs. And they were hypothesizing that perhaps it's because the bud tender has fewer SKUs to promote or sell and have a deeper understanding of those SKUs versus walking into their dispensary where they've got 800 or 1,000 or 1,200 SKUs that they're trying to promote. It's just almost too much. How do you see this across different states? I mean, like, you go to so many dispensaries.
I don't go to as many. I get a lot. I get a lot
I
of kick.
know.
Like it's like people want to share their weed with me, which is good. But one thing I will say is I think location really determines a lot of what goes in a dispensary. And what I mean by that is not like location in terms of like foot traffic, but where you are will be directly tied to the audience that you have. In some areas, people will look for the best products, the most innovative, the most hyped up, the most potent. In many others, people are looking for value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I myself, when I go to a dispensary, also because I'm not a huge fan of super high THC, so I'm not necessarily looking for that premium experience. And I also know that 90 whatever percent, like there's no measure here really, but like a majority of dispensary weed, and I do flower mostly, ain't great.
Yep.
My friends here will grow much better weed because I get it, like the best bud. Like it's when you grow at a such a massive scale. When you go to a dispensary, you're usually not getting great weed. But I do try and find that balance between like, hey, give me something that's good, that caters to my preferences, but it's also within what I consider a reasonable price range. Um, and I think a lot of people look for that balance, right?
Yeah.
You got the people will pay whatever thousands of dollars for a bottle of whiskey, or hundreds of dollars for a couple grams of weed. But most people are looking to find that price quality balance.
It's so critical because it's so competitive. I mean, it's the story or the stats are different from state to state, where an average basket size in New York is much higher than an average basket size in Michigan or California.
Mhm.
But, you see that trajectory of change throughout. I've worked across many different categories even before I came into cannabis. And there's something that is almost like an anomaly where in other industries, if you are a brand or a company that makes, let's say, soda, right? chances are you're not going to be coming out with a vape as well, because that's just not your thing, like the
Mhm.
cross category dominance that we see in cannabis is just an anomaly from and that was probably one of the things that struck me in my first year of being in the cannabis industry, is that companies and brands want to have like every single vertical.
Yeah.
And do you think that is do you think that's a great formula for cannabis, or how do you see that as part of the development?
I think it's a necessary formula, but definitely specialization in general tends to make for better products. I will go to the wine example very often because Argentina wine, and it's
Yep.
like winemakers, good winemakers rarely also make vodka, beer, cookies, whatever,
Blue
pretzels.
sauce.
It's like, yeah, they make great wine in a few different, you know, varietals, which is similar to strains if you want. But that's about it, right? I do understand that it's a need in these times. Um, it's an interesting trend, but I do think that those who really focus on doing something great will tend to achieve better results.
Yeah, you brought up Kiva. Kiva's in edibles, and they haven't gone into beverages. They're not putting out a vape brand, and they're like, we're edibles, and that's
And it's delicious. Honestly, I don't know, like I don't know much about edibles, but I've tried many, and it was like, oh, this one tastes good because they put in all the resources into the one thing, right? We were talking about Puffco, same thing. It's like whether it's the product or their post sale customer service and exchange policy, but they put all their focus into this segment, the
yeah,
hash
one
lover.
form.
How do we serve the hash lover?
Yeah.
Stores and Bickle did the same. It's like, how do we serve this community of people who want to consume flower, inhale flower while not smoking?
Yes.
It's their whole focus. And dude, I used a venti like a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh wow, this is a good experience.
It's so true. We see the benefits of companies that are focused on what they love doing, what they're really, really good at, and don't try to go into, all the form factors. The second company that I was in cannabis was everything, every single category from flour to vapes, edibles, beverages, concentrates. And it's a lot of, from a marketing standpoint, it's a lot of mouths to feed if you've got a really limited budget, because then how do you prioritize, which brand you feed, and how do you support that across, all the entire market? It's very, very challenging. So to be able to kind of take the approach that way.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think like that is like a catch-all situation, which which is also fair. But I think it's maybe throwing a bunch of stuff out there and see what sticks, which again is a fair approach. You got a Cheesecake Factory kind of model,
Oh
and
my God, like that menu.
it works. Well, it works. People are still going. A lot of people love it. A lot of people know much more definitively what they want. I am a guy who will go to a restaurant looking for a specific thing
Me
or a
too.
specific style. I don't want that massive list. Um, but I understand it's also a business model and it works. And you do get the benefits of economies of scale. And again, I think availability is the central aspect, at least to me. So if people can make cannabis products that are widely available and affordable,
Hmm. Yeah,
everyone.
that value equation is so important now. You're seeing that across the board. I don't see people, companies opening dispensaries, like bougie dispensaries, as we would call them, right? Because they're like, yeah, that's like all fine for just going in there to check it out, but is it really going to have the traction that you need as a real business? And we've seen that.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. I'm going to pivot the conversation since, words are so powerful and part of what we do as communicators and people who are really looking at this industry, because words matter and changing the narrative and changing the way we look at ways of normalization. So the question is the pen mightier than the sword with everything that's going on within the context of social and political change right now?
I think so. I have to, right? It's definitely part of my identity and my ethos. It's definitely the right words can drive change. Um,
Yeah,
there's
I've
also
heard.
value in consistency and repetition.
That's interesting you said that, because recently there were a few articles and podcasts, and you've heard some of the Freakonomics article podcast that's been coming up recently on cannabis, of course. And then there's some adjacent articles that I've read on from East Coast publications that are mainstream, and the word drugs is in every other sentence, and I'm like, they're hammering this association between cannabis that it's a drug, it's a drug, it's a drug use, drug. Have you noticed that, or is there something that is you're seeing the
I,
prevalence in?
I've
What's
seen it a little bit. I've seen it a little bit. I try to call it substance. I try to call it plant.
Yep.
Um, ultimately, by definition, it is a drug in a sense. But the purposeful association to other drugs, a lot of people know that they can no longer push the fallacy of the gateway drug, but they know that they can insinuate the association in a way, if that makes sense.
Yes, because they're bringing up these incidents of individuals having adverse effects or seeing.
Which are very real, by the way. Like,
No,
let's
I'm not
not buy
disagreeing.
into the opposite hysteria and paranoia, because I got a lot of that as well. Like, I see a lot of that. Like, hey, you're insert from the pharmaceutical industry. You're a mole. You're doing a campaign against cannabis. It's like, we gotta be mindful. We gotta be honest with ourselves. Cannabis is amazing. I love it,
Yeah.
but it can have some adverse effects on some people. It does have some risks. They're being studied. And denying that won't help us build our argument or our cause.
Or being defensive about it.
If we want to lead with half truths, um, and attack people within our community for suffering, right? There's some very emblematic cases of people who loved weed, who worked as reviewers, and overnight got sick, got like hyperemesis. And it's like, do you think these people enjoy this?
Mm.
Dude, you had a great life as an edibles reviewer. Like,
Hmm.
what's the point? Um, but we are a community that is traumatized for good reason.
Yes.
I understand where that fear and the reluctance to talking about the not so positive aspects of cannabis comes from. Mm, but I don't think we should be making it a central part of our cause, this crusade against our own community,
Mm.
because someone wants to be a little bit more honest about what they're going through. um,
Yeah, just.
so yeah, I think like the decision of the East Coast publication you're talking about to cover the topic is not wrong. The
Mhm.
way
Yes.
they went at it was
Targeted.
definitely charged with stigma and driven by prejudice or an intent to drive clicks, and sensationalism pays off, and we know that. Um, but I do think that we need to be talking about these things. Um, it's it's a very complex issue, but it, I don't know. I At the same time, it makes me somewhat happy that we're having these discussions because it does mean that we are looking at all aspects of the plant and its legalization and its commercialization. Um, because I also have to be very honest with this. These cases are not very frequent outside the US. America's tendency to supersize things sometimes can backfire.
Yeah.
You do double bacon fries and a shake. Why the shake? It's like, if a joint is not enough, you do like the huge bong rip, and then you went to the dab. And it's like I love many of these form factors. Don't get me wrong, but there's always a tendency like more THC, more concentration, faster delivery. Let's shotgun the beer, do a shot of whiskey.
Yeah.
Most other people around the world don't consume substances that way. We don't like stuff our faces quickly.
Well,
If
do
a
you think it
beer
has
comes
something
in
to
glass,
do?
then the whiskey comes with ice and
Do you think?
sips.
Do you think it has something to do with, this seems to be the thread of our conversation today, is like nascency or infancy. If we are adolescent as an industry, but as a country that's less than 300 years old, it's a very, very different kind of development timetable than countries that have been around for a few thousand years. So this tendency to like,
I don't see that tendency. Like, and there's also like this is beyond like anything ideological, right? And
sure,
I celebrate America's entrepreneurship. I
yeah,
celebrate it as a land of opportunity, but there's also like a flip side to that coin, and you know in other countries newer or older than the US, we're not seeing these numbers of occurrences of cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, for instance, or maybe they're not recording them correctly, right? There's also that to consider because America has regulated cannabis
mhm,
widely, because it's been studied, because people consume it, and because it's readily available. Suddenly, physicians are better equipped,
to recognize,
to come up with the right diagnosis.
yeah,
A few years ago, no one could diagnose these people. Maybe it's something that is not well known around the world.
yeah.
So that can also be true, but the tendency to supercharge.
I think that's a really insightful perception in terms of what you're seeing, in terms of how we supercharge things and tendency to lean towards things that just keeps getting bigger and bigger,
Yeah,
faster.
I'm not blaming the creator, and I'm not blaming the victims here. Like, just to be clear, but that is one of my hypotheses. It's like, why are we seeing increasing occurrences here? And I know I need the science to fully grasp this, but that
Well,
is one of my hypotheses.
there are science-based conversations that are happening all the time, and I'm also cognizant of our conversation here, having come out from just 3 weeks from the Benzinga Capital Conference in Chicago. I have to say it was really one of my favorites, just because of the quality of the conversation, the attendants who were there, the vibe in terms of it's not terrible, things are happening. From a brand, from a community standpoint, um, talk to us about what you've created at Benzinga for our community.
What we've created. um, it's interesting.
It's special though, right? There's
It
nothing
is
like
a space where we tried to act as grown-ups for a little bit. And
it.
the industry is a happy industry for the most part. People who
Yeah.
participate in this industry tend to be happy and enjoy their work. They love cannabis. Definitely helps you chill out and navigate the complexities, not just the industry, but the world in general and life. Um, at least it helps me and a lot of people I know. Um,
Well, it's
I
positioned it's positioned as, where deals get done. Are you seeing a
think
lot of deals getting done? What's happening there?
surprisingly, yes. I think like the value of these events is twofold to me. It's like the content and the quality of the speakers, but then the networking opportunities. People
Mhm.
come here to do business, to close deals, to meet their next partner, to meet their next investor, and we make sure to keep it that way to that the size of the event is appropriate for that the venue is appropriate for that the tone is appropriate for that, while also catering to evolving needs. We hosted our consumption friendly after party with Beer Bros,
Yeah, it was amazing.
which it's something that we probably weren't thinking about when we first started this suit and tie kind of event.
Hmm.
um, but I think there's value to providing a forum where people will come together to take, like to talk about business seriously. They will also have fun, but there's a lot of forums to have fun. There's all kinds of cannabis cups and expos and events and get-togethers. Um, but it's almost like in this context, we all kind of step up to this role like, hey, I'm also an executive during most of my day. You don't see this side of me because when we're chatting, I'm more relaxed,
Hmm.
but there is this side of me running a company
Yep.
every day.
Yep.
And we have these business needs. We face the same challenges, we see the same opportunities, and most of us ascribe to the idea, that the American idea of the rising tide lifting all boats, and I love that. I love that a lot. It's
Yeah. It's really become this must attend event of the year. Whether it's Miami or Chicago or the upcoming one in a couple of weeks, the Benzinga Market Spotlight in Anaheim that I'm going to be at, and I was at the LA one earlier in the year. You want to go see your friends. You want to have conversations that you haven't had for a while, and within context of business. How are we helping each other to do well? How are we helping in terms of financing? What are you doing about swaps and debts? And those are the grown-up conversations that Benzinga really create a forum for.
there's I think in general we've sort of embraced this culture of sharing and seeing competitors as peers. Last night I was hanging out with a very good friend of mine who's also in media, who anyone would say is a competitor of mine in Latin America, and we share everything. We share like our finances, like, hey, these are our challenges, this is
Mhm.
the size of this contract or whatever. And one investor of his recently was asking, hey, why do you tell this guy everything? He's your competitor. And it's like, we help each other. There is more value in figuring stuff out together than competing for these few dollars that might be for you or for me. It doesn't matter where they go.
Yep. I love that. At the night before the first day of the Benzinga Capital Conference in Chicago, a number of us were hanging downstairs in the hotel bar. So it was myself, from CCEL, and Alex and Michael from ABD, and then there was the iSpire guys, and there was the Blink guys, and we were all together, and we took this giant photo, which I did post on LinkedIn, and I think my prior employer lost their mind because they're
Oh
like,
yeah.
what are you doing? And I'm like, these people are my friends. We're in this together. And the best way to prosper is what you said, the rising tide. It's how can we work and collaborate together? Of course, we're going to be competitive outside, but we're still friends.
I agree. And it's a small sandbox. It's a big market and relatively few players.
You're
We're
right.
not in a stage where we can't share.
No, and we want to do well, and just whether we're talking about first mover advantage, who's still here, who's not here anymore, ultimately it comes down to relationships, right?
Oh yeah.
And those bonds that kind of keep us together. I'm also cognizant of your time, so I'm going to pivot to our last question. And I gave you a little bit of a sneak. Want to think about this. So, if you had and this is just coming from last night being Halloween, and you were saying you didn't really get to go out and do a lot of trick or treating type activities because you're at the full moon, at the moon celebration. If you had a cannabis themed superhero alter ego, what would it be and why?
I was thinking about this earlier during our conversation, when you talked about the power of words. And whether the pen or the sword is mightier. I always thought if I ever had a rap career, my rapper name would be the Weed Wordsmith.
Okay.
So I think there's something there, right? It's like the utilizing the power of words, right? It's if there was a superpower, I would love to have like some kind of psychic power where I don't convince people, but it makes them open their mind to other possibilities and critically think about what you are presenting as your argument and vice versa. I think arguments and discussions don't have to be about winning or being right, but about getting closer to each other. But a lot of people are not particularly open to even considering the other position.
Yeah, we do get very entrenched, especially here in the U.S., right?
Everywhere, society is very polarized.
Very polarized. So for me, I'm a naturalized American, so I'm Canadian by birth, but I've traveled to over 40 countries and I've lived on 4 continents during my life. So doing well and having a good time, whether it's school or working, career, it meant looking at things from other people's perspective. I'm not talking about it from an assimilation standpoint. I'm talking about understanding and comprehending and empathizing. How do you see the world? How are you accepting it? What are you challenged by? And you're right. Our current society is so polarized that we dig our heels in. There's only one right, and there's only one way. And that's just keeping us apart.
Assimilation is such a bad word in so many communities. And there's a big difference. There can also be evolution.
Yes.
You don't need to assimilate, or you don't need to believe your identity behind to embrace other identities and new ideas.
Yeah.
You can have both.
Yeah. It wasn't so much like that when I was growing up, because being a visible minority, it was about, fitting in. In order to thrive. And so right now, I think the acceptance and tolerance is, how can I be who I am and be diverse and contribute to the well-being of all of us.
That's a lovely thought. I love it.
Before we close, I want to make sure that people know how to find you, and I'm very thankful that you've given us this time today. So what is the best platform for our listeners to follow you?
That's a good question. Until yesterday, I would have said Instagram, but I no longer have an Instagram. Thank you, Meta. Lovely. Verified Instagram, and now they say, hey, you're impersonating yourself. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Not even drug stuff. So who knows? Find me on Twitter, and that's my @Javier Hasse.
Perfect. Well, everybody,
I won't check LinkedIn often. I know that's my fault. It's not a great thing to say in business, but hit me up on Twitter. And if I'm back on Instagram, it's the same thing. At some point, I'll be back.
Sure that would be great, because then, well, we can all help you get that back. You need your community to fight to get your IG back, because that's definitely.
If you know how. So far, no one knows. Only thing I've heard is hire a hacker. And with El Planteo, which is my Latin American company with Nati, we're in a legal situation with Meta and undergoing hearings, which should soon be resolved. And once it is, we won't be able to talk about it anymore. So putting it out there now.
So many challenges when it comes to what we do and the various social platforms that's available to us. We will follow you on X, prior known as Twitter. I'm sure Alexa will be very happy.
Yes.
So at Javier Hasse, everybody, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. We really dug into some really powerful topics in this short period of time. I appreciate you.
Appreciate it so much. That was great.
Thank you.